Brothers and sisters, to be back together in person again. And hello to all of those of us who are joining online. Somebody, I think Graham and John, are probably monitoring the online comments. Free to add comments as we go through. And if you don't know me, my name's Caroline. I'm on the clergy team here. Can we give Caleb and Mac a round of applause for reading that passage? I didn't know that was a genius move. There were a lot of difficult and unusual names in there. Does anyone know what job I'm dressed for? This might give you a clue. Builder, close, Otis. I would be on a building site, yeah. Graham's got it, archaeologist. This is a bricklaying trowel, but archaeologists use it. The reason I'm dressed a bit like this, obviously, if I was an archaeologist, I wouldn't be wearing a dress on site. I'd have steel-toe cap boots and much more sensible trousers on. But before I trained to be a priest, I was an archaeologist. And one of the things that archaeologists are really good at, finding a scrap of something interesting in amongst the mud. Now, before you ask, I never found any gold, but we were always for treasure in various forms. And I think the Bible can sometimes feel a little bit like an archaeology site. It can look confusing. You can't make much sense of what you can see. It can sometimes all feel a little bit like a load of mud. But if you stop and spend a little while looking at it, if you do a bit of digging, treasure. And that's what we're going to do with this passage today. I'm going to put this down because I don't have enough hands. So we're going to look at this passage and find some treasure. It's a passage that's really easy to skim over because it's got loads of names that are really complicated and difficult and a bit confusing. But trust me, I hope I prove myself right by the end of that. So, are you ready to go treasure hunting with me this morning? I mean, the enthusiasm in that response is astounding. I know you can't shout, but wave as a anyone ready to go treasure hunting? Brilliant, that is much more enthusiastic. Can you have a look under your seat in the building? And you should find a label that looks a bit like that, blue tacked on. If you're worried, they've been there for about 4 days, so they've had plenty of time to quarantine. If you're watching online, you also have a label under your seat. You are the family of Narcissus. Does anyone not have a label? Great. Everyone's got a label. Brilliant. Very carefully, because I'm going to reread the Bible passage. And when you hear the name on your label, I want to stand up and stay standing if you're able to. Online watchers, that goes for you too. You know in your heart of hearts if you're standing up when I say your name or not. Everyone ready? Okay, I'm going to go relatively slowly but speed up as we go through. So, to you, our sister Phoebe. Has anyone got Phoebe? We've got a few empty chairs, so we may be missing some. Our deacon of the church in Kenkrea, I ask you to receive her in the Lord in a way worthy of his people and to give her any help she may need from you, for she has been a benefactor of many people, including me. Greet Priscilla and Aquila. Oh, great. My fellow workers in Christ Jesus. They risked not only I, but all the churches of the Gentiles are grateful in them. Oh no, stay standing up. Stay standing up. Greet also the church that meets in their house. Who is a house church of Priscilla and Aquila? If you've got that, if you can be standing up, brilliant. Greet my friends, who was the first convert. Greet Mary, who worked very hard for you. I've got Mary over there. Greet Andronicus and Junia, my fellow Jews who have been in prison with me. They are outstanding among the apostles and were in Christ before I was. Greet Ampliatus, my dear friend in the Lord. Greet Urbanus, our fellow worker in Christ, and my dear friend Stachys. Greet Apelles, whose fidelity to Christ. Those who belong to the household of Aristobulus. brilliant. Greet Herodian, my fellow Jew. Greet those in the household of Narcissus. That's you online. Are you standing up yet? Greet Tryphena, Tryphosa, those women who worked hard in the Lord. Greet my dear friend Persis, another woman who's worked very hard in the Lord. Greet Rufus, chosen in the Lord, and his mother, who's been a mother to me too. Greet Critus, Phlegon, Hermes, and the other brothers and sisters with them. So brothers and sisters with the Syncritus as well. Greet Philologus, Julia, and his sister, Olympus, and all God's people who are with them. So all God's people with Philologus. Greet one another with a holy kiss. All the churches of Christ send greetings. So stay standing up. You're all in Rome. And now we're crossing a sea at Corinth in Greece. And these people are all there. So co-worker sends his greetings to you, as do Lucius, Jason, and Sosipater, my fellow Jews. I, Tertius, who wrote down this letter, greet you in the Lord. Gaius, I, and the whole church he enjoys sends you his greetings. Erastus, who is the city's director of public quartus, send you their greetings. Well, would you look at that? Everyone's standing up. You can all sit down. Don't get too comfortable. Now, you might still be wondering, I don't see much treasure there. That still seems like a big long list of names. We are going to find that treasure, but we might need to break it down just a little bit further, and we need to look for some clues in the names. So names have power, don't they? I'm going to take this hat off. Some cultures have names that mean when you know what caste or clan someone's from, you know how important they are and how you should relate to them just by their name. Now, I think I'm going to got some more up. Tryphosa, Persis, Rufus, Nereus' sister. Great that Paul mentions. And there had been women in the households as well. Now, have a look around, and you might think that doesn't seem very many. But remember, at this time in Romans, not considered very important, and they had hardly any influence. So the fact that Paul mentions any women at all is... You can have a seat. Thank you. And amongst those women were leaders, which is even more incredible for this time. Particular, Junia is described as apostle. We know Priscilla helped teach Apollos the faith. Phoebe is described as deaconess, and she's actually the one that Paul gave this letter, which is a pretty important job. Stand up if you have Neartus, Abanus, Hermes, Philologus, Julia, Tertius, or Quartus. Who were probably slaves. And that was, if you stay standing up for a moment if you can, that means you're someone's property and you treated him. So if they wanted to beat you up, they could, and slaves had no power at all. If you've got the label Nereus' sister on Herodian, if you can, or those who are slaves, if you stay standing up for now, sorry. Though Nereus' sister and Herodian, you're probably freed men or freed women. That is, you used to, but you aren't any longer. Now, some freed people but most were pretty poor. And then we have a few Christians who are quite well up. Jason, he was a landlord in Thessalonica. Paul stayed with him. Erastus was the city treasurer in Cenchrea, and we know that outside of the Bible there's an inscription in Cenchrea which talks about Erastus as well. Phoebe is described as a benefactor, which means she helped people in business, and Gaius was a house owner. And the last lot, all of you stay standing. if you're a household of Aristobulus, if this was the grandson of Herod the Great. He was a pretty powerful man. And Narcissus, those of you online, Narcissus was a freedman friend of the Emperor Claudius. So again, pretty proud of a freedman. Now, they weren't Christian, but some members of their households were. And their households at this point were told, haven't we, like households and support bubbles. But in the room, those people that you lived with, it included extended families, business partners, like they could be huge, the households. But there were some Christians in amongst those households, which were big and powerful ones. So have a look around. Normally, and rich wouldn't be sharing the same space, except to serve each other. Well, not serve each other, and yet, here in church, they're sitting next to each other. Sit down, you fine people. Right, this is the final lot. So, if you are Priscilla, Aquila, Mary, Andronicus Jr., or Herodian, if you could stand up. Priscilla, Aquila, Mary, Andronicus Jr. You're Jewish. Is Epanetus in the room? If he can stand up, he's Asian, Greek and Jewish. So just a smattering of different ethnicities. And there would have been lots of other ethnicities present as well in Rome. And in Rome, you'd have had Greek people, Latin people, North African, Spanish, Celtic, Briton, Gaul, barbarians, and others that I couldn't think of. I couldn't remember. Have a sit down. Thank you very much. I'm not going to make you stand up for this here. Paul gives lots of details about what roles people did and what they had got up to and how he knew them. Like mothers, people who worked hard in the Lord, people who carried letters, who taught about Jesus, who raised children, who taught children, who made food, who visited prisoners, who made clothes, and a whole lot of people who were probably nothing special in the world's terms. We don't know anything at all about Olympus, Phlegon, and Petrobus and some of the others, but they are stand. 2,000 years later, we know their names even if we don't know anything else about them. They still have an important place in the church as they faithfully served the church and obeyed God's will for them and their lives, lived out their faith in their everyday life. Have you spotted the treasure yet? Now, you might find your own treasure, because that's the beauty of the Bible. There is treasure for everyone. But the treasure that I can see is showing you how diverse the church was at this time. Everyone was included. Society which was based on divisions and groups and a them and us, and we won't associate with people who are different. In the church, everyone was included. We see a lived out version in these few verses of what Paul says in 8. Now in Christ there is no difference between Jew and Greek. There is no difference between slaves and freemen. There is no difference between male and female. You are all the same in Christ Jesus. And it wasn't just diverse, this church. Paul had never visited Rome, but he knew their names, nevertheless. A preacher called Andy Crouch says, in an impersonal world, to recognize persons of every personal status, to see them and name them, that was a rare in the early church. So as we start to worship back in the same building, as we start to have more contact with one another, online obviously, but also actually having a little bit more contact with one another through groups, through being at the school gate, how do we make sure that we're together in faith, even though we might have our differences? Could we, here at St. John's, look a bit like those in prayer? We've made a good start. But where everybody has a place, everybody has a role, and everyone. You know, someone has done some research which says people don't really feel that they belong to a church until they know 8 other people know their name. So, a little challenge or task for you to do in the piece in the round, but as you turn around, ask the name of the person next to you in the piece. And if you know their name already, do you know if they've got family? Like, what are the names of their kids or their parents? And something for you to think about on your way home or while you are at home over lunch. How do you think it felt for people to hear their name included in that list by Paul? As that first time, and people were sat in the church and they heard Paul mention their name, how do you think that made them feel? And how can you make other people feel like that? Thank you very much. If you put your labels just on the floor underneath you, I will deal with them later.